What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about The Nun 2. The Nun made her on-screen debut back in 2016 in The Conjuring 2 to stellar reactions, so much so that she got the Annabelle treatment and got her very own spin-off slash prequel back in 2018 with The Nun to less than stellar reviews. Now 5 years later, we get to revisit this Nun and hopefully be able to learn the mistakes of the past and hopefully be able to give us something bolder and better. Now I remember going into this movie kind of hesitant because I wasn't the biggest fan of The Nun. I thought that movie was wasted potential. There's so much that you could do with this character because I think this is one of the most frightening characters that we've had in the Conjuring universe. And what you're able to do with this character, I think there is a mountain of potential. However, it doesn't feel like they have been able to reach that potential just yet. The Nun 2 is directed by Michael Chavez, who has directed a majority of the Conjuring movies, and he also directed The Conjuring Last Rites that came out back in September. And so going into this movie, I really wasn't all that excited because I just wasn't the biggest fan of The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It, which was the movie before this movie. Then we had him directing The Curse of La Llorona, which I think is dreadfully awful and really forgettable. So at the time of this movie's release back in 2023, there wasn't a lot of hope for me going into this, but I was pleasantly surprised, and watching it for the first time in almost 3 years, I really enjoyed this a little bit more than my first time watching it. The movie brings back Taisa Farmiga as Sister Irene, and she teams up with Sister Deborah, played by Storm Reed, on their way to take their vows. And meanwhile, on the other end, you have Maurice, who was in the first film, now being kind of like the gardener of a Catholic school, and a lot of creepy shit start to happen. And starting off with the things that I enjoyed about this movie, I see Michael Chavez having potential in directing. Even though I wasn't the biggest fan of his past two films up to this point, and more recently The Conjuring Last Rites, he proves that he is able to learn from his mistakes and be able to hone the craft just a little bit more, because the direction in this movie and the tone that he goes for, I think, is great. One of the biggest highlights of each of the Conjuring movies, especially the spin-offs that aren't great, is the cinematography and the vibe that they go for. They go for this creepy, eerie vibe that I really enjoy seeing on screen. It kind of does start to pull you in a little bit more to get you invested in everything that is going on. And so I can see the potential that he has when it comes to direction, and just kind of the creepy vibe that he tries to invoke is something that I really appreciated about this movie, and I appreciated a little bit more on a second watch. Taisa Farmiga as Sister Irene and Storm Reed as Sister Deborah, these two, more so Taisa Farmiga, I think she is really the highlight of this movie, and she is acting her ass off to the point where I kind of wish this movie was just one centered focus on her character and her going on a different journey with Sister Deborah, kind of having this spooky road trip. I think that is where this movie finds its strength a little bit more than it does with the later half of this film. Because for the most part, whenever Taisa Farmiga and Storm Reed are on screen, they are a delight to see, and they have wonderful chemistry with one another. You enjoy the camaraderie, you enjoy the journey that they go on, and you kind of get to see a little bit more of that. So I really enjoyed their journey and exactly what they were trying to go for and trying to do. On the other hand, where you have Maurice being kind of like the gardener to this Catholic school, and him trying to build up a bit of a relationship with one of the teachers and one of the students. On a second watch, I kind of appreciate that a little bit more, even though I'm not really the biggest fan of the Maurice character, mostly just because of the way that they handle that character. I don't think he's all that interesting or all that fascinating to follow. But once we shift tones, since we are bouncing back and forth to Sister Irene and to Maurice, there's two different stories going on at the same time, and I kind of wish it was just focused on Sister Irene and her journey. But whenever we go back to the school and a lot of the creepy shit start to happen, the little girl that builds a bit of a friendship with Maurice, she's getting bullied by these god awful stereotypical bullies that just grind all my gears every single time that they pop up. but I really enjoy what they were trying to go for with trying to build up that relationship. And whenever we go back to that school and a lot of the creepy things start to happen, I think that is where this movie really starts to flounder a little bit more. It starts to have that creepy effect that you wanted to have in the first film that kind of failed to a certain extent. In here, they kind of do ratchet it up a little bit more by having a little bit more of the nun being an evil presence a lot more than she was in the first film, because in the first film it felt like she was just playing peekaboo with everybody. In here there are times when they are able to use the nun to full effect, to with the point where she is kind of being mean spirited and going after a couple of people. And so the way that they were able to use the nun in this movie I thought was better than it was in the first film, and I do think a lot of that has to do with Michael Chavez just kind of invoking that fear a little bit more, something that we did feel in The Conjuring 2 when the nun first shows up, and the way that she was used in that movie. In here, they kind of use her in the same ways, and I think I appreciate that a little bit more because there is a mountain of potential that you can have with this character that wasn't really fully utilized in the first film. In here, you can kind of see a little bit more of the trails of what they're able to do with this character and how they're able to use her character. There are some great, fantastic sequences on the way that they use her, the way that some of the bodies drop, and just the tone and the cinematography just makes it all that more creepy and intense that it can start to draw you in a little bit more. Where this movie kind of starts getting into my disappointments or something that I kind of wish they were able to do a little bit more is mostly just with the story and how some of the jump scares happen. Because even though this movie does have a couple of jump scares that actually did get me, and it's sometimes it's cheap, and the way that Michael Chavez is able to frame the jump scares, I think it's something that he needs to work on a little bit more, because it still is those cheap jump scares that get you every other time with the loud bangs and the loud music. There are a couple of moments in here where the jump scares are really effective, and I really enjoyed that about this film. Other times it just felt like we were rehashing things from Annabelle or The Nun, where it just feels cheap to just be cheap. And so when it comes down to the jump scares, that is where Michael Chavez has to work a little bit more on honing that craft, is building up the tension and some wonderful scares that will be talked about, because I think that is where a lot of his weaknesses really do shine. And like I said before, I'm not the biggest fan of the Maurice character, and I kind of wish they made him a little bit more interesting. The way that they use him does start to grow on me just a little bit more, but I still don't find him all that interesting or find a reason why to follow him. And I kind of wish they used a little bit more on building up his character and getting me invested on why I should care about him, because for the most part I really just did not care about him, even though the relationship that he has with Anna Popwell and the little girl that he befriends, there are glimmers and moments where I think he is tolerable, to say the least. But it's still one character that I'm just not the biggest fan of, and I do kind of wish we were able to just focus solely on Sister Irene and her journey. Still have the Catholic school subplot, just with a more interesting lead. The third act of this movie kind of starts to be a little bit more repetitive of what we saw in The Nun, just with a lot less tension and a lot less buildup. And that is where I think the movie starts to slowly decline, even though there are some interesting ideas in there. It just doesn't have the punch that I wanted, and I kind of wish it did. There are moments in this movie that I think are interesting. There's a great moment where the nun kills one of the altar boys, and I kind of wish we had a little bit more of that sprinkled in throughout the entire movie, because I think that is where the potential for this nun is. It's just basically in the kill, and even with the kills, they do shy away from it at times, and I kind of wish they really didn't shy away from it, because I get why The Conjuring was made an R-rated movie, because for some reason that movie was way too scary for a PG-13 rating, even though there have been a lot of PG-13 movies beforehand that were really terrifying. But other than that, they don't really use the R rating to its full effect, and I kind of wish they were able to do a little bit more with the nun, with the mountain of potential that you have when it comes down to this character. There is still a lot that you can do if you had better writers and better directors behind the scenes crafting these movies, but Overall, this is a movie that I enjoyed more than the first film, just not by a lot. It still has the same issues as the first film and most of the Conjuring spin-off slash prequels that Michael Chavez has directed and before him. It's better in a way where it's more tolerable and I don't hate it as much as the first film, but I think there's still mountains of potential that you can have with this character. There's a mountain of potential that you can do and shine a light on this character to make her a little bit more frightening, a lot more frightening than she was in The Conjuring 2. But those are my thoughts on The Nun 2. Have you guys checked it out? Is this one of your favorites in the spin-off slash prequels, or is this one that you just absolutely hate? Drop those thoughts in the comments below. We'll catch you guys for the next video.